Well, the Dáil returns tomorrow, and for Fianna Fáil there is perhaps the hope of a fresh start after the year just passed. Micheál Martin has been touring the grassroots to start a major rebuilding of the party. There have been credible efforts at alternative legislation from the 20 Fianna Fáil TDs, well, 19 still standing since we lost Brian Lenihan, and the latest opinion polls would suggest that the public is starting to forgive, if not forget. But there is one other major obstacle facing Fianna Fáil in the coming months, and that will come in the form of the findings of the Mahon Tribunal. The Fianna Fáil leader, Micheál Martin, joins me in studio. Micheál Martin, good morning.
Good morning, Pat.
Now, I know that on the news it carried part of your statement on Mary Raftery because you had close connections there.
Absolutely. Well, I was shocked and surprised at the death of Mary and very sad to hear of her death, and my sympathies to her husband and son, and to say that I was involved in the establishment of what was then known as the Lafoy Commission, which was the commission to inquire into the abuse of children in industrial schools. And Mary's work in terms of the States Affair programme was a significant contributing factor to the establishment of that commission, but more fundamentally in opening up a chapter in Irish life that had remained hidden for so long. A very significant programme, and I think her work generally, moving on to other areas, cardinal sins and so forth, I think had a distinct achievement of actually linking into fundamental change in how society approached the issue. So it just wasn't a television programme, just wasn't a newspaper article. It actually led to change and a fundamental change in how society itself deals with its past.
And we'll be talking about Mary's work later on in the programme. Now, let's get to the politics of the day. First of all, the prospect of a second bailout, the comments by Willem Butcher of Citigroup yesterday. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think it's a bit early yet to be suggesting that, but I think we should. Our position and my position is what is in the best interest of the country is the one we should pursue. I think it's early days yet. I think it's interesting how people's perspectives have changed on the bailout. I can recall Michael Noonan describing it as an obscenity over 12 months ago. Recently in the Dáil he described it as a sanctuary from the wild volatility of the bond market. So a lot depends on where the Eurozone is. A lot depends on where the bond markets are. But I think, generally speaking, we need by early next year to be very clear as to the funding that the country, the source of funding for the country in terms of funding our education, our welfare and so on. That's the difficulty
for you, obviously, and for Fianna Fáil is that, Mr. Burgess said Ireland wasn't like Greece, but it was in very bad fiscal shape because of its bank guarantee. The decision that it appears was taken fairly hastily by the Fianna Fáil-dominated government.
If you look back on that, Pat, even since then, even up to quite recently, the European Central Bank and others are insisting that no bank should fail, and are insisting that all bonds be honoured, even those that are unsecured and unguaranteed.
Well, they're not saying that about Greece. They're saying that the private sector has got to come in, and they're talking about Portugal in the same light.
They're saying it about Ireland, and they've made it very clear successively. So I think, and even, there's been a lot of refinement of that guarantee since, and a lot of change, and for example, junior bank bondholders were burned and so on like that, but there's been an absolute refusal to countenance any burning of senior bank bondholders, despite the present government's commitments to do so. They haven't been in a position to do it either. I think what is required, though, I think that bank debt that you has to be changed and restructured in the context of Ireland. Why? Because when we were forced to take on all of that at the time of the bailout, there was no European facility to enable banks to be recapitalised.
But the whole notion at the time was that...
So therefore, now there is, since last July, other countries can do it now in Europe. They can recapitalise via the EFSF. So
what you were being told, though, was that no bank should be allowed in Ireland to fail, because if a bank failed here, and we knew that Anglo was dodgy, we didn't realise how dodgy AIB was, but if those two banks had failed, and maybe bringing down Bank of Ireland with them, all the monies that they had borrowed would not be paid to the German and the French banks. So that was an effort to save German banks. Like, Ireland doesn't allow its banks to collapse. It takes on this guarantee. It saves Germany. It saves French banking, and it avoids the contagion they were talking about. And that was the pressure that they brought to bear.
Yeah, Ireland took a big hit in terms of trying to prevent contagion across the rest of Europe. That is true. Also, of course, you must remember that even in the context of Anglo, you're looking at about 51 billion deposits that had to be protected anyway. So you're looking at very substantial issues for this country as well as for the Eurozone. You are correct in identifying the fact that the German banks and other banks, because there's a huge interdependency across Europe in terms of exposure to bank debt. And it's not just the Irish bank debt, it relates to Greek debt.
It looks like it was Europe looking after itself and Ireland being thrown to the wolves.
And that's why it needs to be
wolves.
absolutely revisited and restructured now, given the changes that have occurred since then, particularly in the context of the Greek default.
Will you be giving the ministers a dig out if they decide to play hardball in the event of a referendum, a European referendum? Will you be helping them out, or will you be carping from the opposition benches that no matter what they do, it's wrong?
No, we won't. I mean, I'd be taking a completely different response to the one that Fine Gael and Labour took last year when they were in opposition. I mean, we won't be saying the country is banjaxed. We won't be saying it's an economic corpse. That's the kind of language that Joan Burton and others used, which I think it wasn't true then and it isn't true now. We will do what we think is in the interest of the country, particularly in terms of either negotiating our loan facility subsequently, if that has to be done, or whatever is in the best interest of the country. That's the route we will pursue.
Do you favour a referendum, by the way?
In terms of referendum and the treaty, I'm coming from a party that has been perhaps consistently the most pro-European party from a policy perspective. I'm not happy with the way things are going at European level. I think there's been a failure of European leadership. I think the intergovernmental approach is the wrong approach. I think the Sarkozy-Merkel approach of dominating the agenda is not good enough. And I think it's undermining the community method, which was the method by which all of the countries had a say and a decent input. And that's a trend in the last number of months that I'm fundamentally unhappy with. I have to put that on the record. And I think I've been articulating that consistently and substantively in the Dáil in a number of speeches I've made on the European situation. I think they've missed the key issue here for us, I think, is that the European Central Bank must become the lender of last resort. It hasn't to date. There are some signs maybe prior to Christmas that it may be going down that route. That ultimately is the way to solve this crisis, because it's a financial and banking crisis fundamentally from a global and European perspective.
But in order for that to happen, that they will impose rules, and they're talking about treaty adjustments, they're talking about a fiscal straitjacket, in other words, that would be imposed. And countries would have to either put it into their constitution or legislate for it. Which would you prefer? Would a constitutional change that would force every government to stay within its own budgets?
I don't think you can put a particular financial straitjacket into a constitution.
So you think it could be done and should be done by legislation?
Well, I mean, the Commission have actually said it doesn't need a treaty at all. Yeah. I mean, if you read the tea leaves across the Commission are saying there's no need for a new treaty. It seems to me that the leadership in terms of Germany and France are saying, and Germany in particular, we want a treaty to make it sure to our populations that, look, if we sign up for a new deal in terms of Eurobonds or whatever eventually, that other countries will behave themselves in the Mediterranean in particular in terms of their public finances, and that they seem to need that as a mechanism, if you like, to underpin a wider approach to the issue.
So do you believe that it could be done by legislation, and is that the preferred way? Because you can always repeal legislation in a matter of hours.
I haven't seen it correct, and one can never really predict into the future circumstances that would emerge, that one would have to have a degree of flexibility. I mean, we did sign up to the Stability and Growth Pact some years ago, which is agreeing to broad fiscal parameters. We've no difficulty with surveillance in terms of budgets across Europe, greater convergence and all of that. That can all be, that's logical, it's sensible, it's where we want to be ourselves as a country. But you need to be careful that, for example, they've brought in a new dimension to this in the context of what they call the structural deficit. Now, that's an arguable concept from economists. The idea of putting that into legislation, I would have concerns about and
Explain
reservations
what the structural deficit
Well,
is.
it's basically that deficit that our deficits, we spend and we take money in, and I think our tax base to some extent became too reliant on turnover taxes and so on. So we have to reform and reframe that to have a steady revenue stream coming in, and basically it's what it seems to be emanating from Europe is that, okay, if you take out a lot of sort of spending that you can do without and indeed transitory revenue streams coming in, and that you have a kind of a structural framework. It's a difficult concept in terms of...
I don't really understand it.
But I mean, this is the point. But the Europeans want to put that into legislation, and there's different economists argue, how do you get to a structural deficit? How do you define it? And would you put something like that into...
It logically brings us on to the whole business of the various taxes that Minister Phil Hogan, and we won't go near septic tanks yet, because we will be talking about it with Valerie Cox in a moment, but the business of a water tax, a property tax, these taxes that are going to be imposed upon people. What's your take on them? Because you talk about the need for...
We support a broadening of the tax base and coming back and to ensure that we have a revenue stream coming in that is certain and stable into the future. I think we have to learn from the mistakes of the past where there was too much of an emphasis on transitory taxes, basically taxes that will come in when the economy is doing well. Construction levies, construction taxes and so on, but that when there's a dip, those taxes and revenues disappear and they leave you with a fundamental public finances problem. So I think we do need a more stable approach in relation to revenue generation in the country that's broadly based, that facilitates job creation, and that isn't too strong a burden on labour and the creation of jobs.
Right,
so
but
that's
in terms of a
position.
property tax,
in terms of a property tax, I think it should be related to the capacity of people to pay, and therefore the decision of the government to actually bring forward a proper valuation-based approach is the correct one.
So you'll be helping Phil Hogan with all of that.
When we would want, in the context of the current tax, however, exemptions to be brought in, and we put those before the door in terms of welfare recipients and so on, who should, I think, be exempted from the property tax.
One of the points being made constantly on programmes like this and other programmes is that the middle income people are being hammered all the time. The exemptions you talk about, they will be many and varied, but it's the people who pay their VHI, the people who do this, people who do that, they will be the people who pay, and they're really the people that you need to attract to your party. So if you support all of these attacks on middle income people, it won't do your party any good.
Well, I think we have to do what's right for the country, Pat. It's not just about what's right for the party. And in my opinion, people want to see light at the end of the tunnel. People are worried about their future. They're worried about 2012. They're worried about how they're going to pay their bills. I picked it up over Christmas talking to people. There's a real sense of unease about the future, uncertainty about the future. I think the Eurozone crisis, as it has evolved, has impacted on that sense. And secondly, I think the budget didn't help either, both the work before the budget in terms of all the various scaremongering and the various kites that were flown.
That was an old Fianna Fáil trait, though,
nothing
as well.
Nothing on the scale of what we witnessed before.
Perhaps they brought it to a higher level, but it was something that was done by...
I think we have to change the way we do politics in the country because it's having an impact on people, and consumer spending, consumer sentiment is down again. The domestic economy is very, very flat, and I think we have to start thinking outside the box. In terms of how we support job creation and so forth. So in terms of, I think people will support a political party that is solution-based, that isn't just a party of total opposition, that isn't going to be against everything for the sake of being against it and because you're in opposition and you must oppose irrespective of the merit or rationality.
But you're sitting on the opposition benches side by side with Sinn Féin, who will oppose everything. Yep. Who will be dramatic in their statements, who will oppose for the sake of opposition, which is what Fianna Fáil traditionally did when they were in opposition. And Alan Dukes, who did the Tallaght strategy supporting Ray McSherry and turning the country around and so on, he got no thanks for that kind of attitude.
Yeah, and I think Fine Gael made a mistake there in ditching Alan Dukes too early, because I think they'd have been in government much earlier if they hadn't and if they'd held their nerve. That's just a historic point.
No, but you know what I mean? He got little thanks. You'll get little thanks.
Yeah, but I think we have to change the way we do politics. I just don't think we can keep going on doing what you've just described. People opposing for the sake of opposing everything. I don't want to be in the space where Sinn Féin is. I would much prefer to be in a position, as we did in the last session, for example, where we did bring forward three bills, for example, to deal with mortgage debt. People have problems paying mortgage, household debt. We said, OK, what can we bring to the table? Can we bring some solutions? And we brought legislation to do with the protection of the family home bill. Mark McSharry and the Shannon brought that in. And Michael McGrath brought the personal insolvency bill, which proposed the idea of establishing a debt settlement office to help people cope with household debt and to have an independent office.
Yeah, but if
outside
the government
of the banks
doesn't want it, they have such a big majority they can
and they did vote it down. And I think, on the personal insolvency bill, they took the principle, but they're going to bury it. They're not going to run with it. On corporate donations, we've decided to bring in legislation to ban that. So I actually, it's a newer approach perhaps, but I intend to keep trying to bring solutions to the table, to bring alternative pieces of legislation and say this is how we think things should be done. It's not Fianna Fáil's position to be in a total opposition space for the sake of it.
We were reviewing the year, and one of the people in was Minister Brian Hayes, and this is what he had to say as a comment on Fianna Fáil.
I think it's far too early to write off Fianna Fáil. They're in every part of the country. Obviously, they're bruised and battered at the moment, but the future is for Fianna Fáil to come back at the next local government elections. They did very well in the Dublin West by-election, I have to say. But I think the only way forward for Fianna Fáil is anyone associated with the previous government, including Mr. Martin, I have to say, cannot be part of Fianna Fáil's future, because in fairness, I think there are new people coming forward. It's going to be a very difficult situation for them, but ultimately if they begin to get the right people in place and new people in place, a bit like what we did over the last 10 years or so, there's a future for Fianna Fáil.
So he didn't write you off. Well, he didn't write the party off, but he wrote you off. He said that, even you have to go. And when I look at the list of your TDs, we'll read them out. There's only 19. John Brown, Derek O'Leary, Niall Collins, Barry Cowan, Timmy Dooley, Sean Fleming, Billy Kelleher, Seamus Kirk, Micheál Kitt, yourself. Then there's Charlie McConalogue. There's Michael McGrath. John McGuinness, Michael Moynihan, Eamon O'Keefe, Sean O'Farrell, Willie O'Dea, Brendan Smith and Robert Troy. It's not a great deck of cards to have to play with, is it?
No, it's a strong... I mean, we'd much prefer to have 30 or 40 TDs, a stronger critical mass, but...
You've no women.
All of those TDs are working extremely hard. Avril Power and Mary White are 2 women senators. We need more young people in the party. We need more women in the party. And the next 12 months will see a major drive in terms of opening up the party, changing its structures to facilitate new people.
You've no women in the Dáil. You have 2 in the Shannon, as you said, and you have nobody in Dublin.
Correct. And that's why, one of my first tasks was to ensure that we broadened our parliamentary base in Dublin through the Shannon elections, and we were successful with Avril Power, with Darragh O'Brien, Thomas Byrne and Meath, good senators in the commuter belt Dublin area who were helping us to raise our profile. David McGuinness in the by-election, I think, as Brian Hayes said, did extremely well, is a good illustration of the kind of candidate we need in many parts of Dublin and across the country, people of the area, of the community. And one thing Brian Hayes said, which is absolutely correct, is that we are in every part of the community across the country. I've just undertaken a national tour. I have been in every constituency. There's a strong membership base there. I mean, you go up to 400 or 500 people at a meeting in Mayo, Galway, and across the country.
But
so that gives me a source of hope, and in terms of the future, it's there. And it's
but given your own history, being in cabinets with the governments that are now discredited for what happened to the country, I mean, do you accept the fact that you will never be Taoiseach?
No, I've said before, and I was on another programme, that I may never be Taoiseach. I don't know that. That's in the hands of the people. My job is to rebuild the political party in terms of its people, new people certainly, new ideas and fresh ideas. That's the most significant contribution any leader can make to politics. If we can change the way we develop policies, change the way we organise our society and change the way we do politics. Okay. Now that's important contribution to make. But I would equally make this point though. I've been elected by the people. I mean, Brian is wrong there. It's the people who decide who represents them. Okay. Fundamentally, that's what democracy is about.
I'll read some of the comments to you now. Mr. Martin is talking sense on the European problem and on not playing politics for politics' sake. Maybe there is a future for Fianna Fáil, maybe, but the current lot will need to screw things up first. That's from Donal in Dublin. I read the nice one before I read these. Ask Mr. Martin, does he truly believe that people of this country have forgotten the arrogance, the blind stupidity and the economic treason committed by the party of which he was a member of government in conjunction with his banking and developer cohorts? Mr. Martin would do well to simply stay quiet. The party that broke Ireland has nothing to offer in its repair. Regardless of how he tries to spin it, his party represents what is worst in people and in politics. That's from Jerry Dempsey. Another one says, come back Fianna Fáil, all is forgiven after 10 months of Fine Gael and Labour. That's from Maureen Delaney in Kilkee. Fianna Fáil have put our country on its knees. They will never get back into government again. Micheál Martin is a fool to think otherwise. From Jim in Finglas, they are gone. They will not be back. You're not getting a huge amount of support. People have not forgotten yet. But is that the game plan that, you're not yet a year out of government and you've got to give people time to forget?
Well, first of all, I don't want people to forget. And we mustn't forget. And I think we must learn lessons from the past and apply those into the future. And our obligation and our challenge as a political party in the Dáil is to bring solutions to the problems that people face today and will face into the future. That is our challenge and that is our obligation. as a political party. The rebuilding and renewal of the party is a long journey. It is not a short one. And it's one that has to be, and we have a clear pathway to renewal for the party along a variety of strands. We will, for example, over the coming months, be re-evaluating the core principles of the party, the very core principles that that were there at the establishment of the party, looking at new areas that we should take on board as core values, and then from that, a policy development will flow in terms of a range of issues from education to environment.
Do you know what
you
want to offer the people? I mean, we had Eamon O'Keefe doing a solo run on the septic tanks, but he's been eclipsed by Matty McGrath, formerly of your party, who's now taken to leading the multitudes on septic tanks. But even Mr. O'Keefe, he was making the wrong kind of sounds for your modernist party. In other words, I don't mind polluting my neighbour, or I don't want to find out that I'm polluting my neighbour.
Well, that's wrong, no, Pat. I mean, that's not what he is saying at all.
Well, what is he saying? He wants to go to jail rather than pay.
He wants transparency in terms of what actually the directive or the legislation means in terms. Because
but what most people want is transparency in terms of what's coming out of the tanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And the water table and so on. Absolutely. And we're for that. And Eamon O'Keefe has gone on record as saying that very emphatically. But what Eamon O'Keefe has experience of coming from rural Ireland and representing rural Ireland is people saying everything will be all right on the night, don't worry about the legislation, it doesn't mean any dramatic change. He read more than most the regulatory impact assessment, and he's asking Phil Hogan a simple question: what standards will apply? And Phil Hogan is refusing to answer. And Phil Hogan is saying, for example, that the standards that apply now may not necessarily apply.
But
isn't
the issue,
there's a bit of a
though,
fudge going on from the government side.
The
issue is, Pat, if we're bringing in a new regime, tell people straight up what the new regime means in terms of whether your existing septic tank needs upgrading to the EPA standards of today. If they do, that means expenditure of anything from 15,000 to 20,000. That then, you must tell people that. Not try and tell people, well, actually, it won't mean that. It'll be all right. And there won't be people running around the country looking at your septic tanks. No, we had this before in terms of turf cutting and all that, derogations for 10 years, and eventually it catches up on people. And that's the point that Eamon O'Keefe has been making and has made in the Dáil, along with Senator Breen O'Donnell from Donegal and others, and Niall Collins. And I think that's what an opposition should do.
I think on this programme, now, my colleagues may be able to help me out here, but I think it's in Cavan. They've been doing inspections at €100 a pop, not 50. Yeah. And there wasn't a revolution.
Yeah, the inspections per se are not the core issue, actually. It's the implications of what happens. You inspect a person's septic tank. It's not up to standard. Yeah. It needs to be modernised. To what standard? We can't find out in the Dáil patch. Just check this. Get your people to check this.
We'll pursue
we
Minister
cannot actually
Hogan
find out.
But the point
to what
is,
standard it must be upgraded to.
There does seem to be the attitude that we don't want to know. If we don't find out what's in the stuff, then we won't have to repair it. That's
a
good
misrepresentation of where we're coming from. We're saying, what is the implications of this for an individual householder? If it's up to 25,000, do we need to bring in a programme to modernise the situation? I mean, the rural dwellers have an argument which basically they feel very strongly discriminated against in relation to the
I'm just
issue.
wondering, though, from the politics of all of this, to whom you're appealing. I mean, make big noises about septic tanks and so on, which is playing to the rural,
one issue.
rural constituency. Yeah. I know, but that kind of turns Dublin people off, and you've got to win Dublin ever to get back in power. So they're saying, God, it's disgusting that people should be putting sewage out into the groundwater so they can poison their neighbour. It's just unacceptable at whatever price. And yet that's an issue that you major on.
We're not major. We agree with the need for clean water. I mean, I just have to keep reasserting that fundamental belief that we have. But I do think people are fed up with legislation being brought in where the implications of which are deliberately fudged, because the minister doesn't want to upset people and offend people and tell them the full upfront implications of the legislation. Okay. I think that's a basic necessity and requirement.
One of the big things that is going to happen is the publication of the Mahon Tribunal, and it may come within hours. We don't know. If it follows the Moriarty model, it'll subtly be up on the website, and that'll be it. It's been suggested this could be the biggest test of your leadership, how you handle this. We don't know what the findings will be, but we suspect they will not be particularly kind to Bertie Ahern, perhaps not even to Pádraig Flynn.
Yeah, I mean, I don't say it's the biggest test. I think there's far more fundamental tests in terms of the renewal of the party, some of which we discussed earlier. But we will deal with Mahon Tribunal.
Trying to disavow, perhaps, a former party leader.
Just like I dealt with the Moriarty Tribunal, we will not seek to undermine the conclusions or principles that are arrived at by the judge. I'm not going to preempt the outcome, obviously, of the tribunal. We've waited long enough for it. But we will take what I would term a robust, upfront approach to the outcome of the tribunal and make sure that it informs future behaviour. Already in that context, I mean,
will you accept it? I mean, whatever the judge comes out with, are you going to accept it?
I was the first to accept the Moriarty conclusions. The government didn't actually, and the Kenny refused to. Clearly did when I asked him in the Dáil to endorse the outcome of the Moriarty Tribunal conclusions, citing legal issues potentially facing the state, which I didn't accept. I think there were issues there for Fine Gael and its pattern of fundraising prior to the awarding of that.
In the Haveney place, though,
it's not. I beg your pardon. It's
compared
not
to some of the stuff
well,
that
it's
we've
not
heard.
actually, Pat. Actually, I mean, just reflect
we
on what
went
you just
through
said.
the Moriarty.
You're talking about this was a government contract, right? It was the most fundamental case actually of any covered by any tribunal, I would argue. And it got glossed over in 48 hours by everybody, media, commentators and everybody, maybe because the government are in a honeymoon situation, its history, its past and all the rest of it, and other factors. And anyway, that has happened, and I think the point I would make is that all of the tribunals have highlighted, in my view, an unacceptable pattern of fundraising. We have to look after our own situation at Fianna Fáil into the future. We have to change behaviour. I want to move away from corporate donations. I've already put legislation into the House. It was defeated by the government to ban corporate donations. I think they're the kind of lessons I want to learn from the tribunals and apply and change the way we do business. So we did the national draw recently. It was the most successful in the history of the party. We raised over $500,000. I want a party that's self-reliant in its fundraising. That's not that there's no sense or any perception that it's beholden to special interests or vested interests. Okay. That's where I want to move into the future. That's the kind of response that I will adopt in terms of the Mahon Tribunal.
Finally, I should ask you about your next likely electoral test will be the local elections of 2014, isn't that so? What would be success for you?
Oh, I mean, I haven't gone into the figures yet, but already I've appointed area representatives just to explain to people. These are people who are Fianna Fáil people, will support Fianna Fáil, but also listen to communities in areas where we've no councillors, for example. Daithi, Roiste and Ballyfermot is an example.
I know that you feel that the systems that are in place have been such that they inhibit the introduction of new blood. You tried yourself in the Shannon to get rid of some of the old blood. It wasn't exactly...
No, we didn't get rid of anyone, but we got 5 people elected.
But you know what I mean.
Who perhaps would not have been elected if I didn't... No, that had worked, Pat. I mean, that was a very effective campaign. It was difficult. It was the first time it ever was tried in the party. And it didn't earn me any kind of, friends. I mean, the easy thing for me to do would be to stand back and not do anything. We got 14 seats. People thought we'd only get 12. And we have a strong Senate team, probably one of the strongest in many years.
Okay, but success for you would be to what? Begin to get councillors in places like Ballyfermot where you haven't had one for 12 years?
Yeah, a strong footprint in urban Ireland and particularly in Dublin. And I mentioned, we've Brian Denny out in Rush already appointed as an area representative, Daithi de Roche to Ballyfermot, and people like David McGuinness, those kind of young people. Lisa MacDonald, a young 22-year-old lawyer in Mayo, for example. I want to see people of that calibre coming forward as potential candidates for the party.
But you're probably uniquely secure, though, in your own position as leader of the party because there are so few people to unseat you.
You can never say that in politics, Pat, but I don't see myself as secure at all, and I'm anxious.